microphone up close, webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, pistols and fondle slab of choice, and internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information, because seriously, they don't want you to have just read two sources together whenever I try to prove out. You know, it's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions. Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original.
We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
That's that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
January 17th, 2015, the Ochelli Effect on UCY.TV radio. Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. You know, it is a strange world I live in, to say the least. Man, oh man, I was trying to do some stuff just before the show. I was trying to get out some posts and things, and of course, everything decided to freeze up on me, and I don't know exactly what's going on, except to say that I still hate Windows 8, but what are you going to do, right? So tonight, who do I have on? Because I got no chance whatsoever to announce to anybody what I was doing. Initially, this was going to be the night that I was going to have Jim DiEugenio on to discuss Charles Manson, as it were, and the reality versus the mythology about the case. However, we're actually going to get into that in a much more textured and deeply thought-out way the next time I get a chance to do this, and I don't know if DiEugenio will actually be on my show. We shall soon see, but apparently his Saturday nights are generally booked. Anyways, what can you do? Perhaps I'll get him on one of these days to discuss something. He is kind of an interesting expert on Malcolm X, RFK, JFK, all of that stuff. So... Also politically interested, historically interested in the 60s mainly, but has a great deal of context regarding a lot of other events and time periods, especially on the American side of things. So we'll get to him eventually. But instead, who do I have on? Well, I have someone that's not an author, not a professor of sorts, not one of these pontificating authors, as it were. She has taken a deep breath on the mic, though, as we can all hear. Gillian, how are you tonight?
I'm very well, thanks, Charles. How are you?
All right. You know, I'd like it if you called me Chuck, though, because anybody who's my friend calls me Chuck, just so you know.
Okay, Chuck it is. I'll chuck one at you, Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everybody just calls you Gillian, huh?
Oh, yeah, or Jill.
Or Jill. I'll tell you what, I like Jill better.
Yeah, or Jilly.
Or Jilly. Hey, there we go. Jilly sounds a little like jelly, and hey, we could get real strange from there, but no, I usually don't do that on my show. That's usually what Kim does.
She does.
But that's her deal. I was just telling people that initially the person I had booked on this slot was somebody else who's an author and one of these guys who goes around talking about a lot of different historical events, has a particular focus on things and all that. I've had a lot of different guests on this show, actually, Gillian, for the 2-hour discussion. And, they range from, different doctors, a few different people that could be called doctors, whether they are an MD, a PhD, what have you, various authors, a couple of filmmakers, one actor that I can think of. A lot of different guests I've had over time. And so the strange thing was I was about ready to post and promote that you were coming on tonight, and, of course, everything went haywire on me. And had to restart the computer and everything else, which was fabulous fun because I was trying to finish dinner and then I was going to do the last-minute postings. Mm-hmm. Because it is...
I'm not advertised, which is probably good. I can go under the radar.
Well, that's all right, because you know what? If we get into some crazy stuff, people that pick it up downstream will have more fun with it because they'll say, he didn't even announce this guest, So... But anyway, yeah, Saturday night I usually reserve for one of the authors or whatever. But the fact is, you're fascinating to me for a couple of different reasons. Now, primarily, well, not primarily. Let's not use that word. But generally speaking, I am initially partial to blonde-haired and blue-eyed women. Anyway, so you take a look at Kim, and I've always loved blondes with blue eyes. So there you are with points in the plus column for me as it is to begin with. Plus, you're somebody who speaks straight from their own mind. I don't hear you parroting other people's sayings and so forth when you do your broadcasts or you've appeared or talked to anybody else. I definitely think you're speaking from your own heart and you're not repeating after others, as it were, as so many other people do that do the kind of thing we do. So
that's a very great compliment. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And wrong or right, agree with Jilly, as it were, or not. You'll definitely get an idea that she's authentic. So that's what I do appreciate also. So let's try and lay it out for everybody, because of course you are on that roundtable show, and it is a different time of day where you are in Australia, and a different day, in fact, because for me this is Saturday evening, just after 8 p.m. So where you are is what time again?
It's just past midday on Sunday in Victoria, Australia.
Yeah, there we go. And so, totally different frame of mind and a different place to be. But what I'd like to do, actually, which I didn't do when you were on the round table, was kind of explain to people what it is you're doing and talk about your show, where you broadcast from and all that. We did touch on it, but I'd like to get more into it, tonight. And, hey, we'll kind of go through a couple different things, because you and I... are definitely distinctly divergent personalities, as it were. So I always find this interesting. We can maybe share a couple of items and see what our separate takes are on them. And I don't know, just for some reason or other, besides the fact that you're friendly with Dylan, you definitely have my attention as a broadcaster now. And that's a small group of people that I actually try to listen to and actually feel worthwhile about. So let's explain when you started doing what you're doing and how people can find you and all that.
Oh, I just fell into it, and I just fell into radio. I got some person took me over to Stephen Roberts, and then Stephen Roberts took me to People's Internet Radio, and then I got a slot on People's Internet Radio, and I've been there ever since. But it's my first slot, is People's Internet Radio. I did do a few got dragged into a few shows along the way, and did some co-hosting, and then I liked People's Internet Radio because I liked what they were working for. And then because I'm actually a sociologist, and I studied Chinese medicine, so I sort of have, and I did my major at university in philosophy and psychology and sociology, obviously. So For a long time, I interviewed a psychiatrist once a week on People's Internet Radio. That was quite fun. And I had 2 shows, and I did him once, and then I thought, there's just too many shows, and I'm just becoming almost Irish. I'm getting so sort of locked into People's Internet Radio in Ireland. So basically, I just do whatever I feel like now. I just do whatever show I feel like you do, no doubt. I just grab someone I'm interested in and ask them questions and joke with them.
Yeah, pretty much what I do. I mean, I go for specific areas, generally speaking, stuff that I've researched on, unless I identify it, separately. But what's fascinating to me, I love the field of sociology. I'm not too fond of modern day psychology or psychiatry as it is, because I think it's filled with a lot of really, I would almost call it counter-humanity. There's a lot of this stuff which has been sort of, I don't know how to put it, except to say that, and I've read a great deal of the texts that those who end up with degrees in psychology have read. I've done some of the study that has been suggested to those who wind up with those degrees, and I find a lot of that to be not much more than a pseudoscience. Now, sociology, on the other hand, there's a big difference, in the description of my show, I use the term, psychosocial connections, because these are, to me, an important element of, the human being, as it were, you know what I mean, and not just the... not in a physical sense or in a medical sense, but I mean in an everyday sense, just as important as food and water are the interactions that a human being has with his environment, with his fellow man, with his fellow creatures, and this to me is really the true story of the world, quite often not given to us by the history books and the historians, of our time. You know what I'm saying?
I reckon you're spot on, because we are socially constructed. We are socialized. We probably, if we want to get very esoteric, and if people believe in reincarnation, then one could say perhaps if there is such a thing as reincarnation, we do bring the imprints on our mind from a previous life. But the imprints that we get and babies do have very different personalities, and that could be a biosocial thing as well, but I think it's a biosocial, psycho sort of spiritual sort of thing, for want of a better term.
Right, but, like a cocktail, the way I look at it, and of course, people that lean on the idea of genetics and things like this, especially those who have the greater, like psychiatry in general, to me, seems to be a close cousin to eugenics. You know what I mean?
What was interesting about that, Chuck, was when I was interviewing Stuart Twemlow, he said he wished he was a sociologist. If he had his druthers, he would actually become a sociologist next time, because he thinks it's a far more comprehensive way of dealing with the situation. For example, bullying. He really wanted to tackle bullying and bullying in schools, which is how I actually found him in the first place. And it's about the bystander effect, and the bystander effect is a really interesting thing because we all want to be safe, and we have some sort of drive to fit in with the dominant power. We go along with things, and as a bystander, we don't comment on it. Whereas if you're in a situation where there's bullying and you want to use the bystander effect to your benefit, then you say, we don't do bullying here, and you stand up as the bystander, because the bystander has the power, either by allowing it to happen or not allowing it to happen. And that's really what you guys are doing on your radio shows, is as a bystander making a comment that goes against the mainstream conformity.
Well, and that is an interesting thing because the interplay that is involved in the bystander effect is fascinating in a lot of regards. Now, people do focus on bullying, and this is one of those pet peeves of mine. Because it seems to be quite a bit part of the natural order of things to some degree. The idea of bullying being, such a major offense, to the, and by no means do I support the acts of bullying, but in a general sense, this was sort of sorted out, among younger people in different ways. Now, back to the bystander effect. What you have here is sort of a greater amount of victimization is often identified this way, right? Like in other words, people become traumatized by being witness to certain things. People's sensibilities change because there is sort of a safety factor that, or a security, as it were, which is a little different than the idea of safety, that is sort of sought after by most average, or most typical people, let's just say, right? And the thing there is kind of interesting because not only is there the issue of how the bystander reacts and participates, in the event by inaction or by taking some steps later and so on and so forth, but the effect on the person is almost seen as a grievous injury now, by a lot of more modern psychologists than used to be, right?
What are you saying there? Can you just repeat that last little bit?
Oh, sorry. The thing is that, like, a lot of the, let's just say the current wisdom in the psychological field is that there is a great deal of damage that is done to a bystander in an event or in a situation in a lot of cases, and a great deal of study has gone into that. But there is also the resulting sort of change in the sensibilities, in the crowd in general, which when you break off and go into individual, your individual situations later, has a residual effect later on, and I find this all rather fascinating. But again, I say that, a lot of this stuff is sort of filled with, the old Freudian wisdoms, the old, other disciplines that have come into the field of psychiatry that I think have sort of misled people regarding, the nature of the ego, the amount of damage that can be done by experiencing an event, in a vicarious way or in a witness sort of sense. You know what I'm saying? So this sort of has a lot of different aspects to it. But when it comes to bullying, I wonder how do you feel about bullying in general? I mean, do you think it's been one of these sort of over the top kind of overemphasized, aspects of social interaction, or, do you think it's a serious epidemic problem? I mean, just your own personal opinion.
Well, look, I think that, if you take it to the schoolyard and you look at where you see bullying, look, really obviously, because kids aren't quite so covert. Well, not always. I mean, girls probably tend to be more covert than boys, but, well, anyway, you get to see what the boys are thinking, and say you've got a schoolyard and you've got a whole group of kids, two kids having a fight and other people egging them on, right? Well, those two kids who are having the fight are the show. They're the performance. The performance is bullying and a victim, most likely, especially if they're, someone's picking on somebody very unfairly. Now, people have to... That's when your ethics has to come in, and that's where it's important for kids to work out what's fair, And so basically the audience, though, the ring around the kids usually eggs them on because they just want the fight. So they're not being ethical about it at all. They're just saying, come on, let's see who's going to win this fight. And then they'll tend to go with the status, with the power of the one who wins. Whereas if you've got a situation in which you train the entire school that we have no bullying here, like this is just an example, the school being like a microcosm of society, if you say, look, we don't allow bullying here, then what you do is then you need people to stand up to the bully, right? And normally one person isn't enough, which is demonstrated by the person who's in the ring getting the bejeebers bashed out of him or her. So basically, the idea is that we need to become upstanders, to stand up and say, look, we don't do bullying here. And then the kids in the schoolyard could actually dismantle that fight by saying we don't do bullying here and just change the sort of ethic of the situation.
You see, but that's what it comes down to, is the ethical core of the individual. Because after all, when it comes to a situation where someone is, preying upon another, if there is an automatic and adverse reaction from their peers, this becomes a greater deterrent, I think, than any rule or code enforcement or, identifying, well, this is bullying and this was merely a misunderstanding between two students, you know what I mean? It becomes a very subjective kind of thing. But if you have a greater amount of sort of ethical influence in the crowd, so to speak, it would really change the equation regarding somebody's motive to participate in this stuff, you know what I mean, from the aggressor side.
Sorry. Yes, I was having a conversation with some people on Skype then who are listening to the show. The thing is, what are we trying to get? We're trying to achieve some sort of good communication and harmony, I suppose. But they have. I don't exactly get what you're saying there, Charlie, because I did get slightly distracted. Somebody trying to tell me about my hair colour. But what's happening is. What's happening? You better lead, Charlie, and I better shut my eyes. I've got to shut this Skype down.
Yeah, that happens.
I can't look at them.
It happens to me sometimes. Are we actually being heard? Are we being heard on People's Internet Radio right now?
No, we won't be heard on some people from People's Internet Radio are listening. Admin is listening. I mean, some people are listening. I won't say who. But basically, we could go on if I go for a second hour. But at the moment, we have a fascinating guest on there anyway, and they won't be off for another half hour and another 40 minutes. So I can't even remember who this fascinating guest is, but they're having an interesting conversation. But in terms of bullying, what was your question, Charles?
Well, I was saying that, it seems to me that to sort of solve the problem, as it were, regarding this, especially among kids, and to solve it in the long-term sense, a greater emphasis being placed on, the ethical integrity of the crowd, as it were.
I agree.
Is a whole lot more effective, because look, in other words, let's make it real simple. If there was nothing to be gained by behaving in this way, if no attention, if no feeding into it was, no bad boy reputation was gained, so on and so forth. If there was no sort of gratification regarding stepping up in the hierarchy in that, segregated society, as it were, which is, just basically your immediate peers and all. And of course the equation has changed some, because nowadays, if you're, Mr. Big Time, I prey on people and I'm proud of it, you can go home and post it on YouTube if somebody's holding up their cell phone nowadays. So it's not like it was, some years ago where, you would just sort of gain your schoolyard reputation, right? But the thing is, if people didn't want to feed into that, if the children didn't want to feed into that, as it were, it wouldn't actually promote the act in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If there wasn't an audience, they might not beat on the other kid. If there wasn't a reputation to be gained, the act might not occur at all. You know what I'm saying? And by the way, if you do feel like joining us in over there, that's fine too. No problem. I love to anybody I've interacted with from over there. So, be more than happy to be heard in Ireland at the same time as in the United States. So,
all right.
But I don't know.
I'll send a message to someone and ask them if they'd be interested in streaming us after this, after Kira's show. If she finishes on the hour, then how long are we talking for, Chuck?
Well, we have actually another hour and 34 minutes or so.
Okay. All right, I'll send them a message now. So if you want to stream us on PIR, after Kira, we would be delighted. So there we have it.
Yeah,
Except my spelling says we'll be eagle-getted.
Yeah, you do that a bit. And the funny part about that when you send your text messages to me is that I've got to ask myself a couple of questions. It's not just did Gillian mistype it? Because my eyesight is so bad. It's like, wait a minute. Is this my eyesight, her typing? Is it the computer? What's happening? It takes me, a good 20 seconds to sort it out, and then I say to myself, well, maybe I'm missing the point here, because every once in a while you use a word that I'm not familiar with, because we have slightly different vernaculars, let's just say, between us, because I'm clearly speaking, the American version of English, as it were, you know what I mean? And so there's certain idiosyncrasies involved there that are not necessarily a part of your lexicon, and vice versa, So, anyway.
Yeah, I know. Well, I sort of figure it's brain gym for people, and I saw that thing that they post out on Facebook, and it says, read this, and if you can read this, that's sort of very interesting, and that most people can sort of work out what words are. So I just figure that people can probably work out what I'm saying, but if I hit the wrong keys and I haven't got the main beginning and the end of the word, then people don't really understand it. So I am trying to discipline myself in that regard. But Skype doesn't have spell check, you see.
Well, yeah, but see, mine sort of does. It'll underline stuff when it's not sure, but who pays attention to that? Yeah, but even so, I'm probably one of the world's worst spellers, which is strange because they always told me that the more you read, you can spell better. Yeah, that's not true. No, not for me.
You might be like this guy I met who told me he was dyspleptic. And I said, I think you are.
Possibly,
dyslexic. I mean, he said, I'm dyspleptic.
Nice.
So I thought that was hilarious and sweet.
No, I love that. Yeah, I definitely love that. I was trying to think of the joke that somebody told me that was sort of like that, and I can't remember it now. Well, that falls flat. But anyway, So, yeah, I'll tell you what you've said that I'd like to comment on at the moment.
Sure. I would like to see that, I think what happened was we used to have a classical education, and that included logic and reasoning. And I would like to, and I think that our education departments are extremely deficient in that we don't have philosophy, ethics, logic and reasoning. Mm. And I, if I was to say anything, to the world, it would be to concentrate on teaching children to think, bringing back logic, reasoning, ethics, fallacies, the philosophers. They're all fascinating. I went to a school where I had the opportunity to study philosophy and Greek and Roman history and biblical studies, and they were the subjects that I chose. And I did find art, and I did find them fascinating. But not all. Well, even the local high school now, actually in Daylesford, Victoria, Australia, where I live, has philosophy on its curriculum. So I just think that's what we need, because if you're talking philosophy, you're talking logic and reasoning, eventually.
Well, yeah, but you know what the problem is that modern education, a lot of people think that this is a problem exclusive to the United States, but it's not. They tend to now want to push propaganda, and to push the current norms, let's just say, that are acceptable politically, and socially from a mainstream standpoint. And they essentially shove the singular track of thought down the throats of the children, and don't give them the opportunity to explore, like, how does this stand up when you test a statement? How does it stand up when you take a look at the different angles of it? And I'll give you an example. Like right now, there is a sort of movement in general, regarding human sexuality, right? Now, I'm not exactly sure how old you are, but, I'm in my 40s. And the idea that, human sexuality was hardly even touched upon, when I was in school. If it was taken care of in a mechanical sort of sense. But the, and morality, they would tell you, is left for you to learn at home. The concept now that, that there are, possibly 27 genders out there as opposed to the 2 and things like this is not something that's open for discussion or debate. It's merely told to you that this is the reality of the world. And what it leaves them with is the idea that this is, pretty much you breathe air, this is the way it is. Not giving you a concept of how these conclusions were arrived at, giving no sort of scientific explanation, not even defining the word gender, as it were. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I started to try and have a discussion with my teenage daughter about this, and I was not getting deeply, involved, let's just say, in the ethical question of it or the moral question of it. But I simply started with a statement like this, that, when you're talking about, human genetics, okay, and you take a look at the genetic pattern, okay, and I'm breaking this down to a real simple level so people can understand. You start out with either, an XX or an XY. Okay, and this is where the gender characteristics come from, right? This is where the concept of gender comes from a scientific standpoint. Now, this is
from a scientific standpoint, yes.
Right. So this is my understanding of it based on the science that I know. Well, because I only have these 2 possibilities in what I'm saying, the conversation was shut down. I'm not hearing this because this is hateful. And I said to her, look, this is not a matter of hateful. This is a matter of I'm discussing with you what I understand. Now, if you tell me that there is not only an XY and an XX, but there is an XU and an XV and an XW, well, okay, let's take a look at that. But I'm telling you what I understand. But the conversation couldn't go on, because there's no process, there's no critical process involved with this at all, because the socially accepted answer at this point is that there are so many different possibilities that you can't even look at these parameters from that standpoint, you know what I mean? Or even explain to me how, well, maybe there's a different Y in the XY. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I have been looking at some science on that recently, and there are different chromosomes and things to look at apart from genes, and from what I've understood about the science of it, is that it is not just on a. There's not just. They say it's on a spectrum, right? Like the autism spectrum. Like you can either be a little bit autistic or deeply, profoundly autistic, or you can be a little bit more sort of androgynous or profoundly. And I'm wondering the best way to say this, but I think it shouldn't even be a spectrum. I think it should just be a constellation of sexuality, because I think that everybody's sexuality is actually unique. And they're their own little shining star. So from a scientific point of view, you really have to work out what science you're looking at. Like, is it a chicken and an egg situation, or is it, like, are you just born male and then, you're really socialized into sort of male sort of, we have different roles. Like, there's a tribe in Indonesia, the Batak, or Batak. It sounds like Batik anyway. Mm. And they have very different gender roles for men. And there are other tribes, where... or look at India before they were colonized by the British. They widely accepted that there was what they called a third sex, and the lady boys in the Philippines. And you don't know how much is socialized and how much is innate, and it's very hard to work out what created it. But the fact that it exists within the mind stream of people is really the thing that, and within the bodies of people, is something that we do have in a mundane reality, and that we have to deal with. And those people who have different sexual ideas and preferences in a non-harmful way have to be understood, and feel accepted.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but I mean, it's just I simply wanted to start the discussion, and you see how we've gone back and forth
with science. Yeah. I did. Yeah, you wanted to start the discussion as it being genetically based, and I say that's not enough.
Well, right,
because you'd have twin studies for that, and in fact, I know a set of twins where one is a lesbian and the other is heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
But that.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Go. No, you're right.
That would happen again and again, because the mind is different to the body. It's a part of it, and they're co-creative. But the sexual identification is, and what we think about ourselves does manifest physically as well. I think, don't you? Or do you? Or?
Well, yeah, I believe that it's definitely, again, like a cocktail, because what happens is, regardless of where your genetics begin, I mean, genetics in general seem to me to be like a set of possibilities. Like a set of switches that, when you hit different switches in different sequences, it causes different things, merely because you have a switch in your genetics that would often present itself as violence, or you have a switch in your genetics that would present itself as, addictive behavior, or if you have a switch in your genetics that means that you're going to be highly intelligent. Here's the thing, if your environment and your interactivity doesn't contribute to flipping that switch, it doesn't necessarily get flipped. I mean, this is what I understand from what they call an epigenetic reaction.
Yeah.
So, and of course, epigenetic literally means to be on top of the genetic, the genetic factor, right?
Yeah.
So this is part of what goes on. Now, are there nuances to this that cause, a legitimate sort of base, really, truly organic, cause for the various different sexual orientations? Or is it, really just a disturbance of the individual that causes a deviation from typical, like any other thing? Whether it's overeating or it's, doing something else that's sort of counterintuitive to the species as a whole. Well, see, now that, again, makes it sound hateful, to some people's minds when I say it. But it's not a matter of hate. It's a matter of questioning it from the perspective of, let's put it into, the same sort of realm as everything else, It's not special in that, it's solely created by a genetic effect. That's ridiculous. Anything that, that people say is absolutely concretely just from your set of genetics is almost insane. If you nurture, the genetic soup, as it were, from inception, in different ways, you're going to get different results. A better fed mother creates a healthier baby. So on and so forth. And I think one of the major factors here when it comes to this kind of stuff, and one of the things that has caused sort of a distortion in human sexuality, is the introduction of so many estrogen mimickers into the food supply and the water supply. The neurotoxic elements that have been introduced into the food supply, water supply, air supply, as it were, of the mother, the host. And I think that a serious step back needs to be taken and say, this may be actually an aberration being caused by, a less than organic environment, a less than organic a set of resources that one has to perpetuate their own life and to grow the new life within them. You know what I'm saying? And this is part of my argument. And again, I get, hit with the whole, well, you're just unevolved and you're clinging on to the, you're looking for a reason to hate people that are, gay or transgendered or whatever. But no, that's not my point. In fact, I think that they may very well be victims and having themselves, deviated from what their natural possibilities are based on this biochemical attack, I don't know how you view that, but I mean, that's one of the things that I think is at least worth exploring.
Look, I think there's never... my favourite way of viewing the world is that it is interdependent origination. Like there's all these causes and conditions come together to create the situation. And there's never one reason for anything. There's millions of reasons for anything, I think. And it's really hard to put your finger on why people have different types of sexuality. Especially, as people change the sexuality along the way. I look at animals and I see a lot of homosexuality with animals. I don't think homosexuality is aberrant because of that, because, I'm a farmer's daughter and you'd have a paddock full of heifers and they'd all be humping each other. And even if there's a bull in the paddock, they'd go and hump another cow if they were feeling sexually frustrated. Or, before the bull sort of wandered over their way, or they wandered over to smooch up to the bull. So I don't see homosexuality as aberrant per se, because I've seen it too much in nature.
Well, but see, much as the overall drive to participate in sexual activity, let's just say, among any animal, let's just, for the sake of argument, is the means to the end there is procreation, generally speaking. Now, in some cases, it could be nature's way.
Let's analyze that.
Okay.
I mean, because we don't really know why we exist or how we exist. Mm-hmm. Maybe we were more like, our minds helped in some way, like big mind, I don't know what sort of mind, helped co-create the original sort of slime, what do you call that, the original...
The primordial
slime?
Ooze.
The primordial ooze, the primordial slime, yeah. It's just hard to know, and this is why when you can't posit a basic tenet, it's hard to posit any sort of and therefores after that.
Mm. Well, it just seems that, the species has been perpetuated by, male and female interaction. Otherwise, we would not have such a lengthy history if everybody was gay. But over time, sometimes if there is let's just say a genetic strain, as it were, that needs to be factored out, because many species do die off based on their inability to survive, take care of themselves, so on and so forth, right? This does sort of happen. Now, of course, then I'll get accused of being, somebody who believes in Darwinism, which I do not. Mm. But at the same time, it seems as though seems as though, and I may be entirely incorrect, that this is like part of the reasoning for why it's there. You know, like almost everything in nature seems to have its purpose, you know. So
well, look at it this way, Charlie. When I've had 2 sons, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't want either of my sons to be gay, and it turned out that they're not. But there were phases in which I thought, particularly my younger son was gay. He used to love getting dressed up in women's clothing and just entertaining me. Like, he was he was hilarious. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go, right, now what if this kid turns out to be gay? And I was going, oh, God, well, you know, that's going to be a lot harder for him. And you know, there are things about being gay that aren't attractive to me. But then I thought, but if it's attractive to him, and the only major reason really was, oh, gee, it's a shame, it would be a shame if he had all that social pressure. And I live in a town where one of the insults, I mean, it's a very gay town, but 10 years ago when he was at high school, or you know, in the early years, it was quite shocking for him. I mean, everybody would call each other. The big insult was, oh, you're homo. Like, homo's the big sort of insult, or gay, and so, you know, it would have been hard, but anyway, it turned out that he was heterosexual. But I did go through that whole process, and I'm just wondering whether you're thinking about that, like you wouldn't like your children to be gay because it means that they'll suffer more.
Well, you know, it's not even a matter of that. I mean, personally, here's where I'm at with that when it comes to my kids. And my one child describes themselves publicly even as pansexual at this point. Oh. You know, but to me, it really doesn't matter so long as this was their will that, yes. You know, that caused this, and not merely, you know, their identity being convoluted by, you know, society or by the, you know, or by the GMOs chemicals in the food or the chemicals. If it is their will, if it is their spirit and their desire to do so, and that will make them the most happy, you know, then they absolutely have my blessing. You know what I'm saying? But if it is something that has been, you know, sort of, hoisted upon them, then I am entirely disturbed, you know.
Yeah, I get that, and I think that is really hard to work out. And the one thing that's really, really hard to work out is what is your authentic self.
Well, right.
That's the big question. It's the big catchphrase at the moment, authenticity. But what is it? You know, that's the conundrum, being authentic.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, of course, you know, and I'll admit quite honestly that, you know, I have been nothing at all if I have not been in a state of evolution, you know, throughout my entire life regarding my authentic self, you know, which sounds like a really strange thing for somebody who comes off as opinionated and, you know, likes to discuss their own views about things and go into the specifics of evidence and this, you know, so on and so forth. But that's the truth, is that I've been through an evolutionary process of self-discovery my entire life. And I understand that that's really the most honest way to understand things. I mean, most people latch themselves or marry themselves to certain things that they believe are identifying characteristics, and they hang on to them for dear life, you know, during most of their span on this earth. But you know, for me, I'm not entirely married to any of these so-called identifying markers. You know what I mean? Because I realize that, you know, as new information becomes available, this will undoubtedly change the matrix of who I am. You know, as new experience becomes possibility, as new realities become self-evident to me, this will change the way in which I view the world, and thusly change my actions and what is going to come and the types of things that I'm going to attract personally. I mean, but again, this is my personal interpretation. Trying to get to the authentic self is an endless process, you know. But that's, again, me, you know.
Keep talking, Charlie. I've just got to quickly go and do something.
Not a problem. You know, and that's what's amazing to me. Like, you know, for instance, all right, I often, and, you know, much to the dismay of a lot of my audience, I talk about the JFK assassination quite often. But if I think about the evolution of just that event, in my mind, in my interpretation, I mean, when I was a very young child, I thought something was very wrong with the official explanation, because how does a guy get himself killed in the custody of the police on live television? You know, it seems quite a bit too convenient, you know, to get rid of the guy before he's ever put on trial, and meanwhile, you know, on into eternity, this guy will forever be linked to the assassination, and being the unconvicted and yet still undisputed killer, according to the history books. This seemed wrong to me, but I didn't give it much thought until much later on, when a lot of conspiracy theories came to me, which I thought were extremely ludicrous, that although the government was kind of inept, and although my teachers were inept, and although the educational system was beyond broken, even at that time, I felt as though they couldn't possibly be so far off as to you know, completely identify a guy who doesn't belong in the equation at all, right? Well, yeah. So I sought to disprove the conspiracy theories, as it were. Now, that sounds very funny, again, coming out of me, because I'm the guy who tells you all about nowadays how the official story is absolute garbage, and gives you a lot of different explanations. But what happened is, through my exploration, I discovered that the conspiracy-minded people that I was trying to disprove had a great deal more of the facts on their side, had a great deal more evidence to offer regarding the reality of the situation than did the official story. So I switched from learning, you know, at a very early age, this was the fact, to questioning it, to then seeking to disprove the nonsense of the conspiracy-minded, to pretty much embracing the conspiracy-minded, and then, after that even, further evolution is constantly trying to sort out that which is ludicrous, which is really where I started, except the first ludicrous thing I had to get rid of was the official explanation, and now on the other side of things, I find myself fighting off, you know, the flights of fancy of a great many others who speak on the subject. So over time, this is a lot of different, almost seemingly waffling over one particular interpretation of a historical event. But everything in my life has kind of worked that way, is that, you know, you gain some experiences, you are exposed to new things, you are thrust into different situations. When your experiences change, your perspective changes, your concept of, you know, let's just say the details, or the devil's in the details, or the details in the devils, as it were, you know, they all become relevant in different ways to you. And how you interpret and how you conclude regarding each one of these, you know, any event in your life, any event that is up for debate, will obviously shift, change, and mold over time, unless you are someone who is entirely closed-minded and feel as though, regardless of whatever new evidence or new situations, new science, new reality can be presented to you, regardless of all that, you've got the correct answer, and although the world keeps moving forward, you have no reason to, because you've already answered all the questions of the world. I cannot be closed-minded like that. You know, in fact, if anybody could actually show me in a logical sense, just taken back to that JFK thing one more time, if somebody could show me a logical, you know, sequence of events, a logical chain of evidence that proved quite, you know, in a sensible, coherent manner, that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only guy who pulled the trigger and all that shooting was done from the 6th floor, you know what? I would say thank you, and again, change my position. I don't believe that'll happen about as much as I very much believe that the sun will rise in less than 12 hours from now where I'm sitting. So, that's where I stand on that. But to say that I've closed my mind off to any possibility is not correct.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well,
and where this conversation started, Gillian, because I know I've just prattled on a bit here, but I'd like to go back to things a little bit here. So you had these studies and you had these concepts, so you had yourself an education, a template to begin to work from. What was it that made you want to start broadcasting exactly? Did you just kind of catch a fever from having participated in other people's shows? And Stephen Roberts, by the way, I'm friendly with him. I love the guy. He's a little different style broadcaster than me, not quite as mouthy, doesn't talk as fast, but definitely a guy I like out there, and he's been on my show. And I've been on his show, the one he does for the one he does for Revolution Radio. I didn't get on People's Internet with him, but Revolution Radio I was on with him. So, and his show is Cancel the Cabal, in case anybody is interested and wants to go look it up. I actually did the 51st anniversary show on here with him, and then the next day I did one for his broadcast, totally different. But what kind of attracted you to wanting to broadcast? I mean, you could sit and commit your thoughts to paper. You could be a writer. You could just be another blogger. I mean, why do radio exactly?
Oh, it's easy. It's not that easy, actually.
Easy.
Look, it was just because I could talk. It was just a matter of being Stephen dragging me along to a whole lot of shows with him, and I actually just would talk, and I just really like talking to people, and I like the people I interview. And then when I got on to People's Internet Radio, I was interested in this idea of sovereignty, which I'd realised I always sort of mostly have acted as sovereign throughout my life. I've always been a very sort of radical person that would find one way or another to get around legalities if I can that I don't agree with. And also I think, oddly enough, my mother, I was living on a farm a long way away from my mother, and she paid for me to do a university course down near her at Bond University, which by coincidence my brother-in-law had designed the facade for. He's an architect, and he did a very beautiful facade. But anyway, so I went to Bond University and I did this radio announcing course, and I duxed the class, and so I sort of figured I just did it to keep Mum entertained, and so I'd go and visit her once a week because I was about 200 k's away from her. This is when I was up in Queensland, and so basically I had the ticket and I'd had the experience, on how to write ads, and it was a really good course. And I made all these fake ads and did stuff like that, and tried different radio voices and stuff. But the thing that I've liked about People's Internet Radio was that I could just sort of be me, just be my authentic self, and I haven't had a radio voice or anything, but I am thinking of adopting one. I am thinking of being a little bit more polished now. It's been like a little university for me, I've thought. Anyway, I just like to talk, and then I got interested in things. I ended up with a group of fairly distraught women, listening to them, and I understood what they were saying, who were victims of having their children stolen by the state. So I just sort of went deeper and deeper into all these different areas and thought, oh yes, I have to talk about that, or I have to talk about that. But oddly enough, I'm going back to university in a few weeks, and I'm going to do a diploma of education so I can teach philosophy and ethics in schools, amongst other things. And so I will probably be talking a lot more about education, because that will be the thing that I'll be learning, and I won't want to spread myself too thin with other topics. My next show is, we've had a lot of I just think it's a good way to reach people. Radio is a good way to. It's a passive way. You can just listen to somebody on the radio. I think that's good. So I weren't going to say the other thing I was going to say. Oh well, I was going to say my next show. We've had a lot of. There's a lot of issues about feminism at the moment. A lot of people don't understand feminism. Well, one of my biggest problems, I suppose, is understanding what people mean by any label. Like when somebody says God, I don't know what they mean by God. Or when somebody says feminism, I'm not sure what they're actually angling at. Or sovereignty, like it takes a long time to actually get to the bottom of a lot of concepts too. So I think a lot of things are misunderstood, both in word and in written word. But I think we just have to keep trying. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, those that wish to control the conversation, those that wish to keep people in the dark and uneducated about the world around them, utilize language as a weapon, thusly changing the definitions of things instead of actually addressing the problems and so on and so forth. And feminism is an excellent example of this because feminism has been co-opted in some ways to do a lot of damage, to some people, to society in general. Not some people. Let me take that back. To society in general, because here's the thing: when you say feminism, let's begin there. Feminism is not necessarily defined as, seeking equality for women or seeking a fair shake for women in certain circumstances or addressing the inequalities that do exist, say, in the workplace or in a social setting or in the financial setting, so on and so forth. It's not necessarily just that. There are people that adopt that as a flag of sorts and utilize it to push other agendas, right? It's really more about the agenda behind the word, which is now just a flag that's been planted on, particular efforts out there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And feminism is one of those things that, in one way, some of that movement in general has been an extremely positive and productive thing on society. I mean, my very first broadcast on this network, I went out and made sure to say Happy Susan B. Anthony Day. I don't know if you know who Susan B. Anthony was, but
no, I don't.
An American figure, one of the very few women that's ever had her face put onto a coin, in this country and all that kind of stuff. She's most notably identified with the women's suffrage movement, which you know what that is, right?
Yes, most definitely. I know a lot of. I have a friend who's done her doctorate in that, so we talk about it quite a lot.
Well, if you mention Susan B. Anthony and she knows about the the American aspects of that, then she would know who she is. But
she will.
Yeah, but at the same time, there has also been this attempt to sort of dismantle other elements of society by some people who claim to be working under the banner of feminism. Now, why is this an interesting issue to me at all? Because the same procedure is utilized all the time. They stamp a label on something, and then push a different agenda by it. Like the concept of terrorist, terrorism in general. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter who is another man's patriot. This is a reality. But at the same time, all of those words are extremely different in their definition and in their connotation. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But feminism has been destructive in some ways by the use of it by individuals who have an agenda where they wish to masculinize, or I'm not even sure if I'm using that word correctly, but to sort of apply masculine aspects to the female population to almost destroy, again, what I view as the natural gifts that are bestowed upon women that are not bestowed upon their male counterparts, in the same abundance. Like, to me, I'm more comforted when I'm ill being taken care of by a woman, let's just say, than I am by a man. Men are less comforting to me, personally. There are certain innate skills. I think that women are, generally speaking, better parents, overall. That's not to say that the male doesn't have a definite, essential role in the upbringing of children, but women in general just have a greater diverse sort of way of interacting with their children than men do, by my observation. And again, this may be some very antiquated kind of ways of thinking, but this is how I see the world, you know what I mean?
It depends on what... I don't know the answer to that either. It depends what pressures are on men and what pressures are on women, and how we're brought up, and there's a whole lot of things that go into what creates a man and what creates a woman. But definitely there are very masculine qualities and very feminine qualities that are more innate, for sure. Like even the way our brain is, there is a big difference. Though, again, there's the spectrum where people do have a sort of a combination, and their brain, like when you do brain tests, you can be half male, half female.
Well, right. And neuroscience has shown us that, a great many things are extremely circumstantial, To make a broad general statement or to say all of anything is nearly impossible, because there is no such thing as an absolute like in anything, just about. You know what I mean? This is what we've discovered over time, and of course as science has evolved, I understand that. But it doesn't mean that looking at the percentages, you don't have a greater percentage of, say, women that happen to share a particular characteristic as opposed to men who share a particular characteristic. I mean, you can definitely make a much clearer kind of line between the two, in that way. But they're both equally important. The masculine and the feminine are both important aspects to the being, and even in each other. You know what I mean? The singular person requires both sort of sides of the equation to some degree. You know what I mean?
Yep. I'm just sending a message. People's Internet Radio said that I can take the stream in 10 minutes.
Okay.
And so I've just sent you a link for peoplesinternetradio.com. I can't put it in the chat because I can't work out how to sign into your chat box. So if you want to put it in, you're welcome. Kiri is going on for another 10 minutes because there were a few hold-ups in the beginning of the show. So that's that little bit of business. But I will be broadcasting you, Charles, Chuck, you and I, on People's Internet Radio in about 10 or 10 minutes, I suppose.
Oh, excellent.
So that'll be good. So it'll be lovely.
Well, I love those guys over there. They even in the chat room when I was on with Dylan a couple of weeks ago, they weren't even upset that I had my son on my lap because he was making a little bit of noise here and there. But he seemed to time it really well. So
your son was talking. We were all listening to how much he was going to complain about it, and when you were, well, I was anyway, and when he was going to get what he wanted, and I thought you timed it perfectly. You took him to his limit, and then it was right. I get your message, kid. I'll do what you ask.
Yeah, well, look, they're a whole lot more in charge than we want them to be when they're babies,
Well, I think that's it. I say, I tell people my babies didn't cry, and they don't believe it, but they didn't. They made the noises your kid was making, which was like, I don't like this, and then they'll hassle you, and, they don't have to get to the point where they're distraught. If you're reading them, they'll tell you what they want. I mean, I did once one had a bellyache a couple of times, and he only got that when we had visitors. And I thought about it, and I thought it's really interesting because their nervous system is so subtle. If it sort of spins out a bit, with all this sort of extra information, maybe that's why they get colic or something. But only my oldest one got that. But it's very rare for children to actually go in for a full-blown cry, I think. I think if your kid's going in for a full-blown cry, then you've got to comfort them until, bring them out of it and say, it's all right, I'm here, I'm looking after you. Yeah,
well, most times that's the case, but I've discovered with my son, unlike the earlier two that I had, he actually throws a fit just about every time right before he needs to go to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I'm talking about it, even if he needs to take a nap, he gets all bent out of shape and very, very upset when he's going to fall asleep. Weird thing.
Some of them do that. I know some kids like that. Yeah, it's like a tired cry, and they rub their ear at the same time. And it's when they're overly tired normally, you have to grab them before that, like half an hour before that, because they just get beside themselves. They don't know what to do.
See, and this is fun, isn't it? Because we've gone everywhere from very complex sort of psychological discussion to, here's a suggestion for how you might get your kid to take a nap. So, but you never know where we're going to go. Kind of sticking back to the story a little bit. So you got involved. Certain things fascinated you, like you said, feminism and this and that, and the idea of sovereignty.
Feminism. No. Feminism has never really fascinated me. Feminism's actually something I ignored, to my peril probably, because I think I missed out on a whole lot of clever concepts. I wasn't at all interested in feminism. I was quite an androgynous child, and I was a horsey girl. And
what is a horsey girl?
Well, I grew up on a horse's back or under a horse's stomach. I mean,
okay. I thought maybe it was a term for something else. Sorry.
No. I was a horse maniac as a child, and I was a farmer's daughter. So I was always on a horse or doing farm work, and so I was very physically competent. I'm just okay. I can grab the stream now. So apparently, I think the stream is free. Somebody's told me the stream is free. So I'm now going to see if I can pick up people's internet radio stream with my fabulous broadcasting skills. Here we go.
At least you have some broadcasting skills and you were educated. I have none. I was a musician, and then did some mundane jobs outside of that. But I mean, that was my real experience with radio prior to this. I had been interviewed by other people. That was about the extent of it, and not even a lot. It wasn't like I was famous or anything, but, like college radio stations and things when I went to small towns, touring as a musician, stuff like that. Tapes I can't even get a hold of anymore. Things like that. But the information that we're getting into nowadays not being part of the mainstream, what kind of turned you on to that, or were you always kind of outside of the box?
I was reared by eccentric parents. I'm just going to check whether or not we've actually got the stream at PIR at the moment.
Okay, sure.
Oh, no, she's not quite finished yet. I was told to grab the stream, but I don't think the stream is actually... it's encoding, so I think I have got the stream. What was I saying? I was reared by eccentric parents.
Right. Well, I was asking you about what it is that attracted you to sort of the non-mainstream, atypical, kind of information, as it were.
Well, as I was saying, I was reared by eccentric, blasphemous sort of parents. And so basically, hang on, I'm having trouble taking this stream. I thought I had it, but I'm going to drop it and I'm going to pick it up again. So we give it a click and we'll force a start and we'll see what happens now.
All right.
Hang on a sec.
No, not a problem. So you were
I can talk at the same time. So I was reared by very weird people who were sort of atheists, just unusual people, very unusual people. They're very eccentric parents. And so basically, thinking outside the box wasn't hard for me. I became interested in Tibetan Buddhism. I don't know, I still haven't got that stream, I don't think. I don't know, I have. Yeah, I got it. So, very eccentric parents who taught me to think outside the box. For example, my grandfather on my mother's side was a communist, a signed-up member of the Communist Party, and my mother went to a private girls' school, and my great-grandmother went for a trip to the Orient, and she brought back some Chinese silk pajamas, and so he was so proud of them, he had to go and play at the golf course in his silk pajamas, it's just because he wanted everyone to see silk pajamas, and they were just all like that. They were all just really arty, weird people, and my mother had to wear gumboots to school, and so my grandfather taught her she got teased for wearing them. I don't know why they said she should wear these gumboots. Maybe she had to walk through puddles to get there, and big puddles. So he taught her to do a Russian Cossack dance, which she did to the point that she broke her Achilles heel in Fiji years later trying to show off. But anyway, so alternative ways of thinking didn't really matter. So when I was, it's funny that we're coming on PIR at this point because this is probably a bit of the point where we get to the ad nauseum bit. They've heard it 100 times. When I was 18, about 20, something, I got when I was 10, I got very interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and I said to my mother, I'm interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and what do you know about it? And she said, well, my father said that the Tibetan lamas were the ones that had all the answers. And so I was always encouraged to be what you would call what did they used to say? Not anti-establishment. And that was actually one of the terms that were sort of used by my private school sort of parents' friends, which was, Gillian, she's anti-establishment. So I've never sort of really believed in any one particular way as being the right way. And even when I got interested in Tibetan Buddhism, I argued my way through that. And, I'm a debater. I was captain and whip of my school's debating team. I do like debating and analysing things. So when you ask the question, what is it that made me interested in alternative radio and schools of thought, I just think that I was always encouraged to think for myself.
So the real bottom line answer here is that you were quite normal in your family, but from a societal standpoint, you were already outside of the box, or you were never actually in the box because that's sort of the world you grew up in, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, that's right.
So you started out as a rebel or as an anti-establishment type person in a general sense to begin with, because that's just sort of how you were reared.
Exactly. And then my own family complained that I was anti-establishment when they just reared an incredibly anti-establishment person anyway, because I was so anti-establishment it wasn't funny.
Oh, yeah, I always found that amazing, too. I wound up being the black sheep of the family of black sheep, you know what I mean? So I always found that kind of funny, It's like, we're all crazy, but he's really messed up, I always found that funny. And, just a quick good evening to the people at People's Internet Radio, because you're now being heard on UCY.tv and also on People's Internet Radio. And in case anybody doesn't know, which I'm sure all of them over there do know, Gillian Treblecock, and my name is Chuck Ochelli, by the way. So,
yes,
good evening to you. I
didn't mean to do that. Sorry, Chuck. That was we actually took the stream while we were in the middle of a conversation. I tried to take it about 3 times. So, yes, welcome, Chuck Ochelli from, what do you call your show, Chuck?
The Ochelli Effect.
The Ochelli Effect. So, Chuck, we've talked a lot about me. What about, and we've talked a lot about you, actually. I will just keep sharing the conversation.
Well,
I just start the Ochelli Effect.
Well, I do have to apologize if I've sort of overrun you a little bit. I try not to, but it's usually what I'm kind of good at is usually just interplay and having a conversation with somebody and going back and forth. So, why did I start doing what I'm doing? Is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah.
Well, you know what it was is that as I had gone through, like I said, the whole the whole situation with the Kennedy assassination, as it were, and studying it as a historical, curiosity, seeking to disprove the conspiracy theories, believe it or not, I found myself with no choice but to accept them, mostly. At first, until things became a little bit outlandish. And nowadays, if you have a crazy theory in mind, I assure you can find a website for it. But the thing is that that's where I started out. And, over time, I started to help other researchers do their work regarding the assassination. And it got me into the examination of documents, the investigation of photography, of films, of medical evidence, of ballistics, of all these different things. And what it did is it gave me a very deep sense that the history books are not necessarily written accurately. It gave me the idea that not only the church at a very early age, I had decided had quite a bit lied to all of us. That were supposed to be part of its flock, as it were. I felt that my country had lied to me. I felt the historians were lying to me, and I started to seek truth, as it were. And the first vehicle that I chose really was the Kennedy assassination. Now, after doing that for a while and contributing to other people's work, advising people even on documentaries, on books, on articles, even doing fact-checking, interviewing individuals for different purposes. I mean, I've spoken to everything from mass murderers to former secretaries of defense. Over the years, in order to get a real sense of the reality, as opposed to the historical narratives that have been presented to us. So while I was doing that, and beginning to complain to some people in the alternative media about the really one-sided, nonsensical lack of information in the mainstream media, I pretty much got told by certain people to, why don't you become part of the media and do it your way then, if you think that all of this other mainstream stuff is so bad. So be the media instead of complaining about the media. So
yeah, good on you.
So I said, you know what, you're right. And thusly, I just picked a name out of a hat, kind of. I wrote down 10 different names for what it is I could call the show, not knowing exactly what it was I was going to cover. Except I would start with the events I understood well, which was the Kennedy assassination and some modern contemporary American history, as it were, and world events that I was seeing unfold that I knew were kind of being misrepresented, and sort of apply my analysis, my experiences to it, and my view. So it's sort of my view of the world is the Ochelli Effect, as it were, and also, I figured it was a name nobody else would steal. So, there it is. That's why I started the show, and my friend Jack Blood told me to get in contact with the owner of this network. And I did that and had a conversation with her, and it was, ever since then, this is what I've been doing.
Well, it's going really well, and now you've got some sort of a TV thing, and what's that all about, Chuck?
Well, there's a lot of different stuff going on. There's a lot of different possibilities. Actually, I didn't know you heard about that. UCY.TV is the platform that I'm utilizing, if that's what you mean. It's only functioning as a radio network at the moment. But there's actually been some talks about doing some other stuff. I'm getting involved with some documentary work. I don't know when those are going to come out. One on 9/11, and I've actually dropped off of a project on JFK because I disagree with the direction it's taking. This has always been my problem. That although I enjoy working in groups with people, I don't simply accept what I consider to be really poorly represented work or bad conclusions, for the sake of some money or for the sake of, simply getting the project done or whatever. Most times I've actually spend a lot of time arguing with people over what I consider to be ridiculous conclusions. And even though a fascinating conspiracy theory might be salacious and helps it to sell, as far as a book or an underground DVD or an alternative piece of work, I don't want to participate in spreading more misinformation because, after all, the governments and the schools and the controllers, as it were, already have that market cornered. So, I'd like to stay in the much less treaded path, which is truth. And that's what I'm after. That's the kind of thing that I like to go for, is trying to get people to examine the reality of a situation as opposed to the stories they've always been told,
Well, I like the way you like to approach it from many different perspectives, and I think that's really scientific, for want of a better word, like the science of sociology and the science of psychology, or the science of culture. I mean, I like the way you like to unpack things, and I think deconstructing and unpacking things is really, really important. In fact, I know I have my oldest son is incredibly bright, and he began most of his ventures in pulling things to pieces. As a child, all he ever did was pull his toys to pieces. So I started giving him radios and computers and things to pull to pieces, because that was his idea of fun, was let's pull it apart and see how it works. And I think deconstructing is really good.
Well, right, and to watch somebody deconstruct a mechanical device of some sort is really actually one of those things that you hear about. Some of the better mechanics, some of the better builders of things later on in life. This is one of the things they do early. When it comes to current events, it's more of a vivisection as opposed to a dissection, of course, because a vivisection involves dissecting something that's still alive. A dissection, you deal with the dead. But both things are quite educational, as it were,
Yeah.
Especially, look, when you do an autopsy on a dead person to try and figure out what it is that killed them, well, not only do you learn that, but you may actually learn about the things that led up to it, so that you can tell someone, hey, look, if you eat McDonald's burgers every day, this is what your arteries end up looking like, right? This kind of thing. So that's really the greater purpose behind all this, is to try and learn along with the audience as best I can the ways to avoid, having some of the more deplorable things that have happened, in our society from reoccurring, or from worse things from happening. You know what I mean? And that's the greater, higher purpose involved in what it is, why it is I do what I do. But I've covered everything from, spirituality to historical events to music, you name it, anything that contributes to the greater social construct at large, you know what I mean? And that's what I'm after anyways.
I think that's a very healthy way to go about it, especially if we don't have like a very minute agenda, I think it's good just to focus on one point, if there's some barrier you sort of want to push, because it really needs, putting in the public eye. But I also think that it's good to go the other way. You'll be wondering what I mean by go the other way, won't you?
No, look, a lot of different ways you can take that. You know, I was actually just struck by some of the commentary that I was getting there for a second, because they're hearing us a little behind, and somebody thought they were funny and wanted to ask you, you know, does your son still wear dresses while he takes things apart? You know, and there you go.
Different son.
That's a different son. See, you got to watch, everybody. And there's proof positive, by the way, that I do pay attention when you guys send a message or ask a question in the chat room. Okay, because I've been accused of not paying attention to you guys. I do. It's just sometimes, you know, things are not worth repeating. So sorry, but that I kind of found a little funny, because I pictured a little boy in a dress taking apart a toaster oven. I don't know why. Okay. But meanwhile, wrong son. So, moving on, Gillian, sorry. And
I love it. I mean, the chat, you do have to address the chat. The chat really likes, you know, I mean, they're a part of our show. We love them.
Oh, yeah. No, I love them, even though they enjoy usually hating me in one way or another. It's actually funny. I found it really refreshing that, you know, the people on People's Internet Radio seem to enjoy what I was doing with Dylan, because quite often I get angry messages and upset messages, you know, from people. And, you know, but sometimes they do shape my show, and I don't mind, even if they're, you know, dismayed with what it is I have to say, because it usually those people will listen to me longer for some reason, and I think somehow or other they may be subconsciously learning something. You know, like for instance, a ways back I got a bunch of messages accusing me of being some sort of Satanist, because I had, you know, some unkind things to say about the Catholic Church, apparently. And this went on for a while, about how I was some sort of devil worshiper and I was a Satanist and this and that. And my response to that was to bring on a magistrar from the official Church of Satan to talk about Satanism, and to tell people, look, this is what Satanism is, and this is not what I am. So there you go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you. So I'm just reading your chat now too. There's someone in there called Vincent Easley. I thought it might have been our Vincent, but he doesn't seem to be our Vincent.
No, Vince Easley is a guy who used to do a show of his own on our network here. He still steps in and takes care of a lot of other shows. Vince Easley used to do What Matters Worldwide, and there is my troll, by the way, somebody who hates me and actually goes right along with the name of my show, kind of, and mocks me all the time, somehow accusing me of being Jewish and things like this. I don't know why, but but Vince Easley's a good guy. He steps in, does Cancer Kickers and Off Grid Journey and all that stuff. He's usually about just having open conversations, and you know, definitely an interesting guy. Take a look at some of the archives of mine on SoundCloud, and you can hear me and Vince together. But
he's saying hello to me now. Hi, Vince.
There you go. Yeah. So he's actually a good guy, and if you ever get a chance to talk to him, you'll have an even stranger conversation with him, I assure you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know where you want to go from here. I mean, I was kind of just, you know, getting into what it is that you do and why. It seems as though, you know, you just go along with things that catch your fancy as a broadcaster. Yeah. But, I mean, about getting at the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey used to say, and I don't know if you know who he is, but he was an American broadcaster, kind of legendary. That's really what... you know, what it is that I try to do is get at the rest of the story, you know, the stuff that people are hiding, the, you know, the part of the story that the CNNs and the CBSs and the NBCs and the MSNBCs and so on, you know, the BBC, and I'm not even sure what the mainstream media letters are there in Australia, but, you know, the stories that they won't tell you, you know, the rest of it, as it were, is what I try to get out there so that people have a very complete view of things, you know.
Yeah, we're always trying to work out, well, I am always trying to work out where some good sources are. Like, what sort of sources, are you good at disclosing your sources? I mean, would you like to disclose, say, any of the sources you use, or ones that you think is good to tell people are good to use?
Well, see, that's the thing, is that relatively speaking, at this point in time, there is nobody that I consider to be a standalone source. In one way or another, you know, the mainstream and the alternative have pretty much failed in a lot of senses, because they... We know why the mainstream media fails in this country. I don't know how it works in Australia. I'm not super familiar over there. I mean, I've got a couple of people I'm friendly with over there. But over here, you know, every one of them that seems to be, you know, from a different side of things, as it were, never is. They're all on the same script. You know, they're very much controlled by the corporate interests. You know, and this is, you know, and it's a combination of the, you know, it's hard to tell where the corporate interests and the government begin and end, but working in conjunction, they often control, you know, what stories are being told, how they're being told, you know, what the terminology is, as it were, like we were talking about definitions earlier, you know, like, for instance, this whole ISIS thing, has unfolded in our mainstream media and in our alternative media exactly as I predicted. You know, we've watched them utilize this idea to tell people, look, you still need to be very, very afraid of terrorism. You still need to be very, very afraid of these radical Muslims. You know, so on and so forth.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's the thing that's really touchy ground at the moment about the way that the world is trying to get us to have a religious war.
Right.
You know, like, look at all the people who are just living together in an okay fashion, and then all of a sudden, like, we had this fabulous thing. Well, we had this Muslim guy in Melbourne take over, or Islamic guy take over a chocolate shop, and it somehow made world news, right? And it was all over the place. That was the Lindt chocolate shop siege, and it just happened to be in a place called Martin Place or Martin Square in Sydney, where they'd actually done opposite television studios. I don't know why it did take place there. I haven't followed it deeply enough, but there was a lot of, you know, wondering whether it was all makey-uppy or not. But basically what happened was the Prime Minister decided to make it far worse than it was. He shut down some of the freeways. He shut down some of the airspace, you know. So instead of it just being one lone, you know, sort of freaked out, angry, upset guy who decided that the best thing he could do was do a siege in a chocolate shop, it turned into, you know, they killed everybody, including him, and they closed down space, and they turned it into a huge drama. And then they said, of course, we're going to need to have more powers, as though any of their powers would have helped to stop this guy in the first place, as though you can actually monitor every human and know what they're actually going to get up to. It's just utterly ridiculous. And then they had the Charlie Hebdo thing with the same thing, and then people going around saying, "Je suis Charlie," and I'm going, well, hang on, I'm not Charlie. I wouldn't go around inciting, putting Jesus with a spire up his bum on the top of a building, or drawing these sort of extreme sort of drawings, just because, you know, manners do go an awfully long way with a lot of people, and a lot of people, even though they think that they're broad-minded, still believe that might is right, and, you know, whoever can bully the strongest and team up the strongest is actually in the right. I just think it's just really disappointing to see that how the world is still trying to blow it up into a great big thing and cause people to go around harming each other again. And, it just goes on and on and on like this.
Well, yeah, and the terrible thing to me is, of course, regardless of what the facts are regarding that situation in France, right? They have these two separate sieges. They have to continuously repeat the idea that,
them and us, them and us, them and us.
Them and us, them and us, them and us. And then they turn it into this larger discussion about, well, they're coming to radicalize your children, and they're coming after your children, and they're trying to, they're using social media, and it just seems like a giant psyop. Where you have nothing but a psychological warfare drill of sorts to try and see what would happen, if we can really cause people to gain the type of anxiety that'll make them worry enough so that we can tell them, listen, if you don't want to worry, you can come to us for protection. If you give up some more of your freedoms, you'll be safer. You know what I'm saying? And this is really the overall goal of all of this, and to play up the situation more and more and more and say, well, this is how they were radicalized, and this is what they believed, and this was their motive, and this is who they worked with, and they were funded, and, it all becomes this large puppet show of sorts,
Well, that's right. Well, we had this great sort of counter-resistance in Melbourne, and Sydney, where the Muslims and people wearing, Muslim attire were too sort of nervous to go out the next day because of this sort of anti-Islamist sort of hate stuff that, was for this, or fear was for this moment free to be on the media. And so they started texting each other and saying to each other, I'll ride with you. So then they put out messages all through Facebook, if there's anybody who's wearing a hijab, I'll be on, the number 8 tram at 10:55 or 8:55 and I'll ride with you. And so everybody started protecting the Muslims in Melbourne. And I just loved it, and around Australia. So we got this new thing, which was "I'll ride with you," and it seems it's all almost like a meme for life, isn't it? Like I'll ride with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is the thing, is that it does mean though that this was effective.
Yes.
From the strategic standpoint of those that wish to keep us at each other's throats. And
that's why we have to do a counter movement. This is it. We have to keep on. Thank God there are brilliant people doing these wonderful counter movements, but do keep going.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll give you an odd example.
That's bullying. Let me interrupt again. I love interrupting. That's bullying, and that's the bystander standing up, becoming an upstander, and saying, I'm not going to stand back and watch you do this. I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to stand up against this sort of religious fear-mongering that you're doing, and I'm going to show you I'm not scared. I'll ride with you. Go on.
Well, yeah, okay. Now I have admitted on my show that what is your view on 9/11, by the way?
I think it was completely constructed, and the buildings came down, with all sorts of different chemicals creating wonderful explosions, and they killed an awful lot of people. And oddly enough, now this is weird, I don't know how this happened, but I was watching television about a number of years before 9/11, and they were interviewing a guy in Australia, and the footage never came out again, but they were talking about Arab wealth and religious sort of problems and some sort of thing. Anyway, they said to the guy, and terrorism, and they said to this guy, and he was like a member of one of those families that not Barack Obama, Osama bin Laden was a member of. And he said, we don't need a nuclear bomb. All we have to do is get a couple of fully fueled jet planes and fly them into the World Trade Center and will bring down the world economy. Now, I don't know how they link together, but there's footage on that. You know, I saw it and I thought, oh, yeah, that's interesting, as if you could bring down the world economy because all the computers would be connected to each other anyway. But it was just interesting that someone sort of mooted this idea. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, but I know that, you know, I've watched a lot of those shows for years on what happened, and, you know, they put explosive all around and they raise the building the way you raise a building with a demolition expert.
Okay. So here's... Go ahead.
And Tower 7, you know, which was never mentioned because they couldn't find a helicopter to crash into that one and bring it down.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing, you know, but what has happened since then has been the erosion of the American people's, you know, rights.
Yeah, I got strong opinions on that too, like really, because, you see, when that happened, I've always been into multi-faith and religious pluralism.
Hold on just a second, because I want to get at something that you just reminded me of earlier when you were talking about that Ride With Me campaign.
Yeah.
You know, at that time, and I'm going to admit this kind of shamefully, at that time I completely bought the whole narrative regarding, you know, 19 guys with box cutters flying planes into towers, and felt wounded as did many of my countrymen, and was extremely angry and had that very anti-Muslim kind of sensibility about me. But on the same hand, here's what was going on. I was working in a place where, you know, I worked with a lot of Middle Eastern guys, okay, and we worked with the public. There was a general sense of hostility that was going on, and foolishly, I had one of these guys go out and put up an American flag, okay, because on the property where we worked, we had a few American flags that were always present there. Well, of course, I changed them, or I was a boss at that time. I had one of my guys change the flags and did not even give it a thought. I sent a Muslim guy out there who was clearly Middle Eastern to change the American flag from the pole. Okay. Now, this sounds funny, but I'll tell you what happened. This guy took the flag down, the one that was a bit tattered, okay, and threw it over his shoulder, all right? And the other one he was putting up on the pole when people came and pulled up on the property in their cars and got out and started screaming at this guy and freaking out on him, okay? Now, regardless of the fact that I had this very serious, like, hatred of, not hatred, but like an irrational reaction of anger toward Middle Easterners in general. I didn't take it out on the guys that were employed under me, you know. But the thing was, I was generally like, you know what, if we did, you know, wipe Afghanistan off the planet tomorrow, that'll be fine. That's the way I felt about it, you know, in 2001. You know,
I was buying the opposite, Charlie.
Well, I understand, but I was buying the narrative. But I sent this guy out there to change the flag. He's got one American flag which is tattered over his shoulder. The other one he's putting up the flagpole, and multiple cars pulled up on the lot to start screaming at this guy and threatening him and everything else. Okay? The only thing that put a stop to that situation was that I had to physically get out of my office, go out there, because I wasn't looking to change the flag. I had other things to do. But I had to go out there and literally diffuse the situation, you know. And even with my sentiment about what had gone on, you know, in recent days, and this tremendous wound that I had felt had been inflicted upon what I still believed was my country, okay, you know, I still did the right thing regarding this. This had nothing to do with this poor guy who was working with me, who, you know, had been sent out to do, you know, a simple job because he was there to do maintenance anyway. You know what I mean? And it just so happened that the guy was, like I said, Middle Eastern in general.
Charlie?
Yeah.
Another way that, you know, that we rear our kids, and as I was saying, and my family were more eccentric than that, is that one of my sisters said to me, well, when we believed that it was a Middle Eastern reaction, was, well, what do you expect after what we've just done to them? You know, like, we'd already been bombing for years and years and years, and so we sort of realized, that war creates war. But interestingly enough, the whole course of history could have been changed, because what they did at that point was they got that Giuliano guy to come along, and he was the mayor of New York at the time, and he went and got that moron, I officially have to call him Billy Graham, and they got a church. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. I'm not joking. Like, the cringe factor was enormous, because I watched, the World Trade Center thing on TV for about 3 days. Like, I just kept, I just basically gave up everything and just watched what was going on. And I thought, oh, good, they're going to go to church and they're going to say, compassion, compassion, compassion. And instead they started calling it the axis of evil, and they started labeling everybody evil. And Billy Graham was there thumping the pulpit like a moron. And I was thinking, my God, there's these really intelligent people sitting in this cathedral in New York listening to this absolute moron. Like, no one in the world could buy it. Like, I always think people are much smarter than that they could be. But how tragic. But had I, ruled the world that day, I would have gone and found a Muslim, a Sufi holy man. And I would have had a Sufi invited if I was the president or the mayor of New York or the president of America. I would have invited that Sufi holy man, who was very erudite and spoke beautifully and said, and it was modern, a liberal sort of Muslim, to give a speech about peace, and it's sort of understandable that a few people have planned, after all the terrible harm that you've caused to our countries by bombing them, and we've had our children's arms and legs blown off by your things, and of course we're going to want to react and say, look at us, please stop harming us. Like, the incredible tolerance that's actually gone on the behalf of the Muslims and the Islamic people just never ceases to blow my mind. It's not that I like the religion per se, though I do think the Sufis are pretty amazing, and I think they are the highest school of thought. But yeah, it's all in the way that we reacted to it and the PR, and that's just was it. Because
do you mean the Sunni?
I don't know.
The Sunni as opposed to the Shiite or Shia?
I'm talking about Sufi, S-U-F-I, like okay. Sufis, like Rumi, like the mystics. I suppose
okay.
Yeah, the mystics who penetrated the essence of the being, of the mind, of our place in time. It's sort of beyond religion. It's sort of like Gnostics, as in knowing, the knowers of, they just needed a few holy men like that to say a few things. But instead, we just blew it up so that we could go and blow up another country and take more control of the people.
Well, right, and this is the end result of it. I've been asked by the chat room, I don't know if you saw it in front of you, but been asked two things. One, and by the way, we only have about 7.5 minutes on my broadcast time left.
Okay.
After this will be my wife's show. So, yeah. I mean, if you want to hang out on there for a little bit, you can. But you've already done 2 hours with me, so I don't know if you got the patience for that.
Oh, look, it's just a lovely invitation. I actually had my old psychology lecturer ring me up yesterday and say she wanted to bring somebody up, and I said, yeah, so I've got some guests coming, so I won't go on for long. No, I'll end on the hour.
Okay. Well, then let me get to these last two questions that were asked by the chat. Okay. Mm-hmm. You've heard of the dancing Israelis as they were after 9/11? Okay. So the first question is, of course, what do you have to say about that? And the second question is, who do you think actually did it regarding 9/11? Since we were talking about 9/11 earlier, they wanted to know your perspective on that. Both of those things.
Well, the dancing Israelis, I said, but I actually don't know who the dancing Israelis are. When you said it, I was thinking of the whirling dervishes, which is actually, different. Who are the dancing Israelis?
The dancing Israelis. Okay. In summation about them, real simple. They as the towers were being attacked, blown up, whatever it is you want to say, they were filming the event. Apparently, they were arrested and later released. And then, of course, quite legendarily went on Israeli television afterwards to say that they were there to film the event, and there has been the idea circulating that they were connected to the Mossad, etc., etc. Do you know what I'm talking about now?
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is that they knew it was happening.
It's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what they're asking about, yeah. So, I mean, what do you think about the dancing Israelis who were supposed to be celebrating on top of another building while filming the destruction of the towers?
Well, they're obviously not thinking about the people who are in the towers, are they,
Well,
how many thousand people died in those towers?
Well, yeah, it's something, near, the full day's casualties are around 3,000.
Yeah, well, I mean, we always have to think of the individual and the big picture, don't we? Like, everybody has feelings. Every single being, has feelings. That it impacted on it's impacted on the whole world. So, of course, it's nothing to dance at. It's absolutely horrendous. And obviously, they're people who've been deluded by deluded parents. Whereas, when it happened with me, I said to my son, well, this is what they should have done. They should have brought a Sufi, a holy man, and they should have said, this is not the true religion, and these are just some aberrant people, and this shouldn't have happened had that been the situation, which we now know is different. So in terms of who do I think really did it, well, I think the United States did it to themselves. How else would they have had access to the building?
Well, you know what? That means that you and I pretty much are in agreement. I just simply say it was an inside job. I will continue to say that. As for the exact criminals in charge of that, I think it has yet to be revealed. But the bottom line is that it seems quite a bit more likely that it was a self-inflicted wound as opposed to some sort of foreign-based attack. So here's the deal. I'm down to the last 3 minutes, as it were, so I pretty much do this. I say thank you to everybody who has decided to tune in to the Ochelli Effect tonight, whether you've decided to come in on the TuneIn app, the Shoutcast, the iTunes, internet radio, as it were. If you're catching it further downstream, I thank you as well. Also, if you come to the website at ucy.tv/TOE, you can find the archives there for the show, and there's now even a little thing that lets you go to the YouTube playlist. So I appreciate everybody who has tuned in and decided to listen to this conversation tonight. My guest has been Gillian Treblecock, which is spelled Terbilcock, and she's a broadcaster on People's Internet Radio, which I think we're still being heard on as well over there, and you can find that at I think it's, what is the web address exactly?
It's peoplesinternetradio.com, basically. We'll take you there.
There you go. So in the last all lowercase, right. In the last closing couple of minutes here, which we're down to about 2, I always say, listen, is there one sort of message or one sort of statement you want to get out there at the end? Please feel free. The floor is yours, Gillian.
Okay, well, you spell my name Treblecock, Trebilcock, but I don't particularly want to be famous. I think the most important thing is to get in touch with your own heart and know yourself. And whenever I feel, I think it's best, to talk about things from our own side. Just keep investigative, but I think one of the most important investigations is within our own personality and our own, what you were saying right in the beginning, Charles, the word ego. I'm talking about the false self. I think we have to recognize what is our learned behavior and keep on deconstructing from that as much as possible. And remember that the most amount of happiness is found in serving others, or in making other people happy as much as we can. I just think that's really important. That's sort of how we create harmony, is to try and see the other person's point of view and see what it is in ourselves that stops us from being able to see their point of view. And Charles, you're very fun interviewer and person to interview, and I've enjoyed it very much. Chuck Effect. Chuck, I mean, not Charles.
That's all right. I do appreciate it very much, Gillian, and thank you so much for your time. And I find this interesting always to sort of explore people's ideas, to take a look at the other side of the issue, and to get to know people a little bit. I think that it's extremely important that we continue the learning process, because life, if nothing else, is a great chance to learn over and over again. Every single day there is a chance to learn something new, and let's get more at the truth together as time goes on, because there are enough people out there that are trying to push the lies. And the bottom line is, the more that we stand united as people, the more that we seek to take care of one another, the more ourselves will be taken care of. So I agree with you philosophically on that note. And again, really a pleasure, and thanks so much to the people on People's Internet Radio. You guys have put up with me. I didn't bring the baby this time, though, because he was sleeping. But who knows? Maybe we'll do this again, and always you're welcome to come on anytime you'd like. And, of course, we'll have to get our days and times straight, because, after all, it is Sunday for you, and it's still Saturday night here. All right, everybody, stay tuned for Jaded coming up next. Everybody have a good night. Bye.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, days and the fondle slab of choice. I don't know when that was. Internet, professional wrestler, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information, because seriously,